Welcome, friends, to Homeschool Conversations with Humility and Doxology, a series of interviews with real-life homeschool moms and dads. I'm Amy Sloan, a second-generation homeschool mom of 5, and I'm so glad that you have joined us. Be sure to check out the show notes for today at humilityanddoxology.com. Today, I'm joined by my friend, Dawn Garrett. Dawn, thank you so much for coming.
I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So Dawn loves learning with her 3 children at home. Following the principles of Charlotte Mason, she and her children learn about God and his cosmos by studying the 7 liberal arts in order to know him better, imitate him and his ways, and share about him with others. Dawn is active at Lady Dusk on Instagram. She blogs at ladydusk.blogspot.com, and she acts as community manager for pambarnhill.com. And she's also the author of I Am, I Can, I Ought, I Will, Charlotte Mason's motto explained for upper elementary students. And that is free on her blog.
It is. It's the longest title I could possibly come up with.
Well, I love it. A couple years ago in our morning time, we call ourselves like a restful classical family. So classical education is sort of the title insofar as I'm comfortable with, a title. But a couple years ago at our morning time, we actually used some of your resources and incorporated that motto as part of our morning time routine. So it's a great one.
Thank you.
All right, well, Dawn, let's start. And if you would please tell us a little bit about your family and your decision to homeschool.
Sure. I guess I'm going to start with my decision to homeschool a little bit because I first heard about homeschooling in the early 1990s. I had a friend of my sister's who was homeschooling. I was like, you can do that? That's allowed? That's legal? Who knew? And I just watched her family for a while, and I thought, how wonderful that you get to be with your kids and enjoy learning together. Mostly enjoy learning together. You get to raise them in the day-to-day, not just in the hours that are left to you, kind of a thing. So that was kind of like a requirement for me that I wanted to homeschool any children that I had, and so anybody who I was going to marry was going to be on board with this plan. So in the late 1990s, I started dating my husband, Jason. He has a brother who's quite a lot younger than he is, 12 years younger, and he was being homeschooled in middle school, and Jason saw all the benefits of it, and so he was on board and I was on board, and this was all before we were engaged. We were still dating and talking about homeschooling. And so Jason and I got married in 2000, and then we had 3 children in somewhat rapid succession. And so we have Margaret, who is 15, and Nate, who is 14, and Rebecca will be 13 in June. So they're just kind of all together doing a lot of the same things and working together for the time being. And it's nice to have the opportunity to keep them together and to work with them on many things.
That is so neat. I can see so many similarities with my husband and I before we were even married, as we were distant for a good bit of our relationship. So we would talk on the phone and analyze each other's theology and philosophy of life and, what are your educational principles? So we had kind of talked through all those things before we were even married or, had children or the possibility of children. So that's really fun.
Yeah, we didn't really talk about the details of it or the principles of it. We were more becoming Reformed Christians. We were both Christians, but our theology was kind of becoming the first thing that we were working on in Bible studies and figuring out exactly what kind of a church we were even going to want to be attending and members of and serving in. And but the homeschooling was sort of a adjunct piece to that, but we didn't go into any detail. We hadn't done any research. We just knew that we wanted to do
Okay, so you started kind of knowing big picture, like we want to do this thing. We're not exactly sure the details. So
Mhm.
can you tell a little bit of the story of how your educational approach then has grown over the years?
Mm. So I had my first baby in 2004, and within 2 months, I read The Well-Trained Mind. Um, and in February, she was born in October. In February, I went to my first homeschool conference. It was a classical conference. I had friends who were homeschooling, Well-Trained Mind style, classical style, um, and so there were a lot of influence. I was watching what they were doing, trying to pay attention to, how to establish a homeschool because their kids were 4 and 5, and I had a baby. So I had a little bit of time to pay attention and try to figure things out. Um, and one of those friends, well, Heather Tully, right?
Yes, I know of her. Yes.
Okay. Well, she was my local friend, and then she moved to Atlanta. But she and I read several books. We read a book called Wisdom and Eloquence, and we read a book from Dr. Perrin about classical education, just a little booklet that Pat sometimes even gives away, and some other things, and talked about them. And so from The Well-Trained Mind and from doing it and then reading blogs, I was very influenced by Cindy Rollins and Brandy Bensel and Misty Winkler and all those guys. We got started, and eventually I was like, ooh, that book from Ambleside Online looks neat. Ooh, that book from Ambleside. And so I was trying to actually do two. I was trying to do Charlotte Mason-y things and doing Well-Trained Mind things. And you know what they say about riding two horses at the same time, right? It doesn't work very well.
No. Too exhausting.
It's exhausting and it's painful. Things just don't work great. And I was starting to feel torn into, broken. Things were not as integrated as I really wanted them to be. Faith was like an add-on and not like the central piece of what we were doing. It wasn't woven in and out through history and science and all the things. Even though I was pulling from generally Christian resources, it wasn't as, I don't know, whole for us.
The synthesis wasn't there, seeing it all related.
Right. So we decided to just go full on Charlotte Mason with Ambleside Online. My oldest was 5th grade, so 5th, 4th, and 3rd grade-ish, and we aimed at the middle when we came to AO, and started with year 4, and we're just finishing year 8.
Wow. So. Okay, so I know some people will be familiar with Ambleside Online, and some people may be like, what is this thing of which you're speaking? So could you you talked about like a year 4. Could you kind of explain for someone who's never heard of Ambleside Online before, what it is and what the years are and sort of how it works a little bit?
Ambleside Online is a free Charlotte Mason curriculum. Women who have been homeschooling for a very long time in the late 1990s started the curriculum. They decided they wanted to figure out the best book list that they could to meet a Charlotte Mason style education, and they have built this amazing thing. And each year is roughly approximate to a grade if you start at the beginning. So year 4 is roughly approximate to 4th grade if you've always done a Charlotte Mason Ambleside Online education. It works fine for a 5th grader. It probably would work fine for a 6th grader. It just, you need to fit your child based on where they are, where you are. My kids had always been working together, and except for things like grammar and math and each an individual writing program and each this, there were things that they were doing separately, but for all our content, everything was all together. So it made a lot of sense to continue keeping them all together. My older 2 were both completely able to move in to Ambleside Online, so 5th grade, 4th grade. And I could drop a few things and keep my 3rd grader kind of involved, even if she wasn't getting the same amount as the others. But she would have definitely felt very left out if she would have felt it if she were doing a younger grade. So the creators, the advisory, the Ambleside Online advisory, have done this amazing thing. They have complete book lists for grades for years 1 through 6, which are, again, approximately 1st through 6th grade, but can skew a little older easily. They even have a book list for year 0, which would be a preschool, kindergarten type of a book list, just really good books to read with your littles. And then the House of Education is for 7th through 12th graders. It is certainly challenging enough that any of those years would be high school years if you make sure you adjust the sciences, because you need your lab sciences and you need your some of your other foreign language kinds of deals. But they're reading Churchill and Utopia, and I mean, just really, really high school level quality literature in the House of Education, or as AO people call it, HOE.
All those letters and the alphabet soup.
It is, but they have done just an amazing service. Everything on the site is free. They have weekly schedules for every year for 36 weeks of lessons. So they break out the books for the year for you if you want. Some people don't use their schedules, and that's perfectly fine. We definitely recommend doing slow reading with those, but they have everything all laid out for you in that way. My oldest is actually going to be doing years 9 to 11 in 2 years, starting in April. They have a couple of those schemes. There's also a 7 to 9 in 2 years, 7, 8, and 9. So they have done some things to make it so that the whole curriculum is really approachable, it's free, and they themselves are accessible. They have a forum on their site and a Facebook page, but the forum is really, if you really want to know AO, get a forum. So
that's fantastic.
And they have all of Charlotte Mason's volumes, many PR articles. Much of the literature of the Charlotte Mason world is housed on Ambleside Online, completely free. So they're just, the generosity of the advisory has been one of the most astounding things to me about using Ambleside Online.
That is amazing. I think sometimes with, Charlotte Mason or whatever is sort of the word educational philosophy, a homeschool mom comes in and you have all these voices saying, well, to do it right, you've got to buy this thing and do this thing and this, that, and the other. And what a resource to be able to go and have access to all these online books and the wisdom and the experience of these moms who have gone through it with their own children. And yeah, that's amazing.
And figured it out. They have all done more or less the AO years, and they figured out how to pull it together. It's just spectacular. So helpful.
That's amazing. Yeah, I do not follow the AO schedule for in our own homeschool, but I often will go to that and I'll be like, I'm wondering if there's a book sort of in this topic for this sort of age range. I wonder what AO has suggested in that area. It's a great resource, even if you're not using it as your sole curriculum. It is just a wonderful resource for the homeschool community.
It is.
Yeah. Okay, so we've also talked about AO is Charlotte Mason. And again, this is one of those terms that is thrown around a lot. People say this a lot. How would you express what you believe about what is essentially Charlotte Mason education? And then do you think there are misconceptions or ideas about it that maybe aren't as helpful?
Charlotte Mason is a liberal education for all. Her ideas about education, she she didn't codify them because they were already in existence. She just wrote them down for us, and they're the 20 principles. And they start with children are born persons. What does that actually mean, that a child is a person? In the early 1900s, in the Victorian era, they were seen as incomplete, as still evolving into becoming a full person when they were born. But Mason said, no, children are born persons. They are full and complete and able to learn from birth because they have a mind. And so then she develops the next number of principles based on what does it take to educate a person. It takes authority and docility. It takes treating them rightly, not using their emotions or your emotions against them, so that they can learn to love knowledge, not learn to please you. It talks about, we have 3 tools of education: atmosphere, discipline, life. You'll hear that tossed around a lot in the Charlotte Mason community. The atmosphere of learning, of an interest, learning and an interest in and knowledge. It's not so much about making a, like a child-centered classroom, but it's more like mom being a thermostat in the home. I've heard people talk about that. You're setting the temperature, the tone, you're setting the atmosphere of your home for what it means to learn and grow. Discipline of habit is the second of those 3, and it's using good habits to advance your learning, the habit of attention, the habit of I lost them, but different habits. So the habit of attention is really a big one, but using good habits to accomplish the work that you have before you and to stay on course and steady. And that one's always very hard. And then
for mom too.
Oh, harder for mom, because remember, you're setting the tone in the atmosphere. So, so you following through on your habits helps to set that tone. And then life is the last, and a lot of people confuse education as a life with education as an atmosphere. Education as a life is about living ideas and using living books, and you'll hear the idea of living books passed around a lot also. So we use really well-written narrative books to give knowledge, to feed the mind of a child, not the brain, but the mind, which is kind of the whole of the person. So we get through atmosphere, discipline, and life, and then there are more about how we teach and what we teach, and then kind of the goals. We're looking for a science of relation. Karen Glass says that the 2 most important ones to get are children are born persons and the science of relations, which means that a child is making relationships with knowledge, relationships between knowledge, relationships with the teacher. The education is about all of those relationships, because when you relate to something, you love it. And there's a famous Charlotte Mason quote: "It matters not how much the child knows, but how much he cares." In the end, we want them to love learning, love knowledge, love
education, so that he can care and go out and serve master.
At the end, we talk about the ways of the will and the way of reason, and then she sums everything up and says, we allow no separation between the sacred and the secular. That all knowledge is God's knowledge, all knowledge is truth. Or history class, even if it's not necessarily strictly Christian in nature, can still be holy, because we are learning God's knowledge. And so we keep that before us without separating. So the whole thing from start to finish is about looking at a child and bringing them up in the fear and the admonition of the Lord. So that's how I think of a Charlotte Mason education. So your second question is, what are some of the confusions that people have about Charlotte Mason kind of essentially.
Yeah, misconceptions, confusions.
I think, yeah, I think one of the things that kept me from Charlotte Mason early on was it seemed so discombobulated, which sounds really weird because I talked about how I really appreciated the how
Connected, synthesized.
Interwoven everything was. But when I first looked at it, there's like a lot of different things going on, and there's a lot of moving pieces, and there are. But at the same time, people say, oh, it's just nature study. Or, oh, it's just, I don't know, it's so light. And I guess I don't really see anything light about what my kids are reading these days. I already alluded to it some, but they're reading Winston Churchill's Histories of the English-speaking People and loving it. And they are reading Bacon's essays and Milton's Paradise Lost. And I mean, there's nothing light about what they're doing, but I think in the younger years where you're reading maybe some smaller things and really being encouraged to go outside a lot, which is fantastic, but it has a purpose and a point in the long run. I think people look at Charlotte Mason and say, oh, it's just nature study. And it's more than that. It's definitely a full and complete idea of education. So
yeah, it's really interesting as I hear you talk. Whenever I hear someone express Charlotte Mason in a full-bodied way, I see so many similarities. It's almost like, well, maybe I am a Charlotte Mason homeschooler without thinking of myself that way, because I see so many similarities in how we pursue education. A rich and varied reading and seeing how everything is connected together. And there's so many things that I just am like, yes, keep saying what you're saying. This is great. So I think sometimes, as a second generation homeschooler, I see this, whether it's with philosophies of education or whatever. Homeschoolers sometimes like to put themselves in little boxes, and it's like, well, this is our box, and if you don't perfectly fit in our box, you don't belong with us. And I think there's so much that we really learn from one another, and I think we have a lot more in common often than we think we do.
Yeah, I do too. At the same time, I really do think that Mason's 20 principles kind of give you a framework that you can work in if you are doing a Charlotte Mason style education. There are a lot of similarities. I remember we were driving to the Outer Banks and we stopped at Monticello, and we went through, the tour, and you see in Jefferson's library his notebooks that he's keeping weather journals and gardening journals and commonplaces and all of these things. And I'm thinking, we do all what it is that we do because it really solidifies knowledge and ideas. And she wasn't around when Thomas Jefferson was alive, right? So there are a lot of ideas from what would be considered classical education, and I do think that she fits within that classical tradition that she has pulled into her style of education that really helps students to have that clear and full vision of learning. There are places where we don't really intersect very much. For unit studies, for example, Charlotte Mason education, we really want to focus on the child doing the work and not the parent providing everything put together in a neat box. So there definitely are dividing lines for Charlotte Mason. So it just really depends on kind of where you're coming from. That said, I have friends who are unit study homeschoolers, and I'm more than happy that they are doing what works in their home. But Charlotte Mason and her principles and the ideas, the laws that she kind of pulled from her reading and her study, they make a lot of sense to me. So that's kind of where I fall down on that. But I love homeschooling. I love homeschoolers and all the wonderful things that they do.
Yeah, I'm with you. All right, so moving a little bit away from specifically Charlotte Mason to your family's homeschool schedule. One thing that's really, I find unique about the way your family does your homeschool is that you have aligned your homeschool schedule with the calendar year. So did you do that from the very beginning, or why did you do it? What are the strengths and maybe challenges that you face aligning your school with the 12-month calendar year?
We did do that from the beginning. So my oldest two are particularly precocious. Were particularly precocious as young children, and they were entirely ready to do academic work. And they wanted to do it. They taught themselves to write letters before I was ready to teach them to write letters, you know. So they were kind of driving that bus. And as I mentioned before, Margaret's birthday is in October, Nate's birthday is in January. And so it just routine starting in January. So we, at the beginning of our homeschool, we started in January. I always knew we wanted to school year round. I always knew that we wanted to have kind of more that freedom to travel during school times, you know, the traditional academic year, or to, I just knew that we were going to need to do school in the summer too, because with kids close in age, sometimes the routine is what keeps mom sane, right? So we kind of established that very soon. Now there are some tricks to that. As my kids are getting older and taking online classes, that can be an issue because the online classes, they don't follow my schedule for some reason. I don't get it. So that, you know, they're taking semester long classes, and our break, our last day of school officially is the Friday before Thanksgiving. But then, you know, math and Latin and music lessons always go no matter what. But math and Latin classes go on into our break time. My youngest is going to be taking an online class that will also go into officially our break time. But we talked about it beforehand, you know, you want to take my oldest particularly, you want to take this Latin class. This is how it's going to have to be. And she agreed to it. So there's that. And summer camps also become an issue with schooling year round and schooling in the summer. We have our church camp, we have a family vacation. My in-laws pay for them to go to a Worldview Academy camp one year. VBS can also affect because our kids want to either attend or now they want to be helpers at the church's VBS. And the online classes aren't as available. We also have potentials for summer missions trips and other things as they get older that make schooling in the summer a little bit harder. But we can usually work around it pretty well, and it doesn't cause us a huge problem because we do what's called, some people call Sabbath schooling, 6 weeks on, 1 week off. So we do 6 weeks of school, and then we have a week to kind of catch our breaths and reset and get ready to go for the next 6 weeks. And in the summer, we just kind of extend those weeks off sometimes. But we still get 36 weeks of school, which is what is required. Our state requires 9 days, so we manage.
Okay. And to go back to, I mentioned at the beginning in your bio, your Instagram account. I love on your break weeks, I love watching your Instagram account because you guys do tons of baking and you get all those snacks prepared, and you really can't look at your Instagram stories when you're hungry, because then you've got to go find a snack and it's just not as good as what you've baked. Well, Dawn, something else.
Yeah, baking day has become a tradition. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, baking day has become a tradition and people seem to really enjoy it. So I always post that day in particular. But I also do office day, where I'm going through all the paperwork I haven't done for 6 weeks. And I'm doing a field trip day. So sometimes we get a field trip slipped in there. So it's still a school day. And you know, I've got homeschool planning to do for the next 6 weeks. So I've got a planning day. And so there's a lot of work that goes into that break week. And that doesn't always get as shared. But yes, baking day is a fan favorite, I think.
Definitely. Well, Dawn, something else that I just really love and admire about you as I've gotten to know you over the internet is that you prioritize your own continued education. You are reading and learning and growing just as an individual. And so I would love to hear kind of like why you think that's important. I think we probably all know it is important, but why you think that's important. And then if there's a particular book that you have been reading relatively recently that you would really recommend or that has been impactful to you.
Okay. Because I'm kind of a boring person if I'm not reading something good. You know, I'm home. I do the things with my kids, and I don't have like a, oh, in the HR department this week, this happened. You know, I don't have that anymore. And I'm not a hobbyist. I'm not an athlete. Reading has always been my thing. When I was in 4th grade, our teacher read us the Diary of Anne Frank. I read all of the World War II books until up and into college. So I've always been kind of a book person, and sometimes that ebbs and flows, but in general, I just like to read books. And so it's important to me. I don't know why it's important to me. It's just what it is. It helps me make connections. It keeps me interested in things going on in the world and relationships with my family. We talked about the science of relations, and that reminds me of that, and that reminds me of that is really fun. So I don't really have a reason why I am always reading something, but I always am reading a lot of things. Something that I've read recently that I found really impactful. I recently finished an audiobook. I haven't traditionally done a lot of audiobooks because I'm a pencil in hand kind of girl. But I've been doing a lot of audiobooks this year. One was Hannah Coulter by Wendell Berry. I am no agrarian, but I loved that book. It was really just wonderful. She reminded me a lot of my grandmother, same age, same generation, to some extent the same lifestyle. I mean, my grandma still is living in the house she was born in, and it's on a farm. And so I really enjoyed Hannah Coulter a lot. And I recently read and listened to, I'm trying to do more poetry this year. That's something that I'm actively, I've never been a poetry kind of reader. So I have a stack of poetry books that I'm going through a couple of poems every day. And I just listened to / read Paradise Lost. So I got a good audio version, and then I held on to the book. And part of that is because my kids are reading it and I'd never read it. And part of it is because I'd never read it. And I kind of felt like that was a hole that I had. But I knew that if I just listened to it, it would drone and I wouldn't hear it. And if I read it, I would not keep going. So for me, the trick was reading the text along with listening in my ears. And that kept me from getting bogged down in all the illusions. And it kept me going, and it kept it from just being like a low, steady drone where I was thinking about other things instead of what I was listening to. And I got a lot of steps doing that because I have my Fitbit. So I would walk in circles around my house, reading and listening to Paradise Lost, and that worked out pretty well, actually. So I really enjoyed it. There were parts of it that I was kind of like, I'm not sure I agree with what Mr. Milton is saying here. And in general, I have issues with fictionalizing scripture, like that I don't usually read at all. So I was a little concerned with going into it, but it was different enough that I don't think that I will get scripture and Paradise Lost confused. So that's one of my pet peeves. But
Yeah.
so those are a couple of my favorite things that I've read this year.
So with like Milton and Dante, I think kind of share a similarity where they're talking about like spiritual things, but not always in ways that are actually theologically accurate. And that doesn't necessarily detract from the themes of what they're talking about or the value of reading them, but you do have to just be very aware, like, wait a minute, what are you saying here? And the other thing they share in common is what you were saying. You can get so bogged down in the illusions with either of those authors. And the first time through, especially, just to be able to kind of get like a big picture view and not try to figure out every single illusion. Because otherwise, it's like if you read a book where you're looking up every single vocabulary word you don't know the answer to, you just lose the train of thought of the story. So.
And sometimes it's just the flow. Like we do Plutarch in our homeschool, and a lot of people say read a paragraph or read a sentence and narrate it. And we do that a lot, but sometimes we'll read a whole section of Plutarch, and then and all of the context helps understand all of the individual parts a little better. So you just kind of have to go with the feel and the flow of what's going on in that section. And I think Milton for me was like that. I had to just keep going and not try to read all the footnotes.
Yeah. I'm listening to an audiobook version right now of the Odyssey. I've never listened to Homer audiobook. So I've read the Iliad multiple times. I've read the Odyssey before once and didn't really care for it, mainly because I don't like Odysseus. But now I'm listening to it and I'm like, wait a minute, do I like this? I think I might like this. And it's just interesting how the same text, but heard or taken in a different way can bring out different elements.
And originally those would have been just heard and not read. So so I think that's really an important way sometimes to face Homer in particular. We did Beowulf as an audiobook, and kind of the same thing. I read it and listened to it. The kids, I think, only listened to it. But I did two separate. I read Raffles and I listened to Haney. And so that's interesting too, to see how different translators work with the text and bring it to life. And I've heard nothing but good things. I think you're listening to the Emily Wilson.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I've heard nothing but good things about that particular translation. I actually have it on my Audible. So.
Well, you should listen to it and let me know what you think. Well, Dawn, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. I really appreciate it. I respect you a lot, and I'm always sending people your way, especially if they're curious about Charlotte Mason education. So if people want to come find you, where should they go?
On Instagram, you can find me Lady Dusk, all one word, because dusk is the opposite of dawn. You can also find me on Facebook. If you don't do Instagram, most of my Instagram ends up on, I have a blog Facebook page It's Lady Dusk Blogspot. So you can, if you look that up, my personal page, my personal Facebook is also Lady Dusk. So you want the probably the blog one. You can find me on Goodreads. I've been much more active on Goodreads this year. I'm also Lady Dusk there, and my blog, of course, ladydusk.blogspot.com. I've been blogging since 2001, off and on sometimes, and right now it's all been book reviews. I need to actually like write something.
Well, I enjoy your book reviews as well.
They're all copied from Goodreads, so choose one.
Okay, well, and I'll have all those links at the show notes for this interview. So make sure you guys check that out at humilityanddoxology.com. And I will talk to you later.